Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh Jeffries video. In this video, I'm going to be restoring this 2011 MacBook Pro with fried graphics. This is an extremely common issue for these 2011 MacBooks with AMD graphics. This one usually shuts off before fully booting, but on occasion I am able to get into macOS and be bombarded with messages saying the computer has detected a potential problem or that it was shut down or restarted because of a problem. While it works while it's running on its integrated Intel graphics, as soon as anything GPU intensive is detected and the MacBook switches to the AMD graphics, it glitches out and crashes. This particular MacBook is an early 2011 model with an AMD Radeon 5750M graphics and a Core i7. It's the largest Mac laptop ever made with a massive 43cm display. Compare that to a 28cm MacBook Air from 2015, and you can see the difference between the smallest and biggest Apple laptops. While fixing this MacBook, I'll also be giving it some much needed upgrades, thanks to my mates over at iFixit for sending across a 16GB RAM kit and an SSD for this project. If you want to check out any of their computer parts or one of their awesome toolkits, I'll leave a link down in the description. This particular kit includes a 250GB SSD, screwdrivers and an enclosure to be able to transfer data from the old drive. I received this laptop as part of a 26kg Mac lot I purchased from John from Roadkill Incorporated. John is a Mac refurbisher and reseller who, like myself, supports the right to repair movement. I'll leave his YouTube and website in the description below. To fix this MacBook, I'll be using a CMI Zapper GPU killer, which will reprogram the Mac's ROM to no longer detect the faulty GPU. This little add-on board wasn't cheap, costing me $100 Australian. I'll also be replacing the keyboard as the left shift key isn't working. To begin, I'll remove the 10 Phillips screws holding the bottom cover in place. While the bottom is held in with Phillips head screws, there are various Torx screws throughout the device, so I'll be using my iFixit Protect toolkit for this repair. Taking that bottom off, which is also clipped down into place, I can start by disconnecting our battery before we begin removing the logic board. While you could solder the chip into place without removing it, I need to do further work to the logic board after the installation of the GPU killer to make everything work properly. I'll need to remove all the flex cables, some of which were hidden under some metal brackets, and all of the Torx screws securing everything down into place. I will leave the fans attached to the logic board as it's not necessary to remove them. Carefully maneuvering the board out, I can now place our GPU killer chip over the ROM of our MacBook Pro and solder it into place. Ideally, you'd want to use a microscope for this, however, as I didn't have one, I'll be doing it by eye. You need a very tiny soldering iron tip to be able to get a more precise application of solder and avoid bridging the pins of the ROM chip. Although to make things a bit harder in my case, I was also working around the camera. After soldering it into place, I cleaned everything off using some alcohol and an old toothbrush. Now that our ROM will be reprogrammed, we have to kill power to the old GPU. This apparently stops the computer from detecting the GPU on boot, which may cause it to crash. To do this, I'll need to remove a resistor up near the left fan. For this, I used the same soldering iron to see whether it could be removed without using hot air. While it took longer than I was expecting, I was able to remove it without causing any damage to surrounding components. Afterwards, cleaning the surface with some alcohol to remove the flux. With that, it's time to test our modification. I'll place the logic board back into the laptop and reconnect the flex cables. I won't yet install any screws as we'll need to do further work later. Pressing the power button, nothing happened. I pressed it again and it seemed like the laptop was only briefly turning on. I reflowed the solder joints and did a PRAM reset, and after that, our laptop now boots. I'm not sure whether I just had a bad solder joint on the GPU killer or I needed to do a PRAM reset to get the ROM to reprogram, but regardless, the GPU has been disabled and the Mac only reads the Intel HD graphics. One issue faced is no brightness controls or backlight after resuming from sleep when running macOS High Sierra, so we'll need to do 2 more modifications to make that work. After removing the logic board again, I'll remove the speaker from the other side of the board as we'll need to solder a wire underneath. However, before we do that, I noticed some corrosion on the board which I'm wanting to remove. To get a closer look, I'll remove the heatsink from the board. After doing so, I can clean off the CPU and old dead GPU in preparation for later when I'll reapply some fresh thermal paste. Now I can use some more alcohol and a toothbrush to remove the small amount of corrosion from the board. While I'm at it, I'll also use an anti-static brush to remove any of the dust and grime buildup. Getting a very close look at the board, I'll need to remove this component and solder a wire to the test pad next to it. To do this, I'll be using hot air to remove the component and a soldering iron to solder in the new wire. I started by preheating the board in the area to which I was going to be removing the component to reduce strain on the board from the heat. I used 380 degrees of heat to melt the solder before lifting the component away using a pair of tweezers. Then I could solder in a new wire. This one I actually salvaged from an old PS2 keyboard cable. Here is what it looks like after the modification. Not bad for doing it by eye. The other end of the wire needs to connect to the PWM pad on the GPU killer. These additional wires are only needed for use with High Sierra and later, as the display drivers were changed and require the dedicated GPU to work. By running these wires, we are making the GPU killer control the brightness. So for the second wire, we need to connect it to a test pad which will read the keyboard input so we can change the brightness using the brightness keys. With our modification done, it's time to reattach our heatsink and get some new thermal paste installed. I'll remove the crusty old thermal paste and clean out the fins before we reinstall it. I'll be using Arctic Silver for this, and whilst I did install some on the GPU, this isn't necessary as it shouldn't have any power now anyway. Reinstalling our heatsink, I will get each screw started before tightening them down in a star-like pattern. Once all the screws have been installed, I will tighten them all down into place. And with that, our logic board is hacked and ready to go. However, before we put that in, I'll need to install our new keyboard so we can hopefully fix the broken shift key that this computer has. I'll start by removing the old Wi-Fi card and the DVD drive. With those out of the way, I can remove the 3 screws from the speaker and remove the warning label from the battery. This was really secured into place and proved quite difficult to remove. It's clear Apple really didn't want you removing the battery for some reason. With the speaker out of the way, I'll need to remove this bracket which goes across the keyboard and the expansion card slot. That's right, no dongles with this guy. You can just simply slide in the expansion card of your choosing to get any ports that you would like. With that out of the way, I can remove the backlight film from the keyboard, which will give us access to the actual keyboard mechanism itself. This is only lightly adhered down into place, although it contains many layers, so I'll try my best not to separate those. With those out of the way, we can get a closer look at the back of the keyboard. Unlike newer Mac models, the keyboard is actually removable and isn't riveted into the case. So if you have a faulty keyboard, it's easy to replace. In saying that, there's over 50 screws holding this down into position, so it's still quite a time-consuming process to remove the keyboard. In the case of new Mac laptops, if the keyboard fails, you'll need to replace the entire top portion of the laptop, which includes the battery, trackpad, keyboard, and aluminium top. Not only is the keyboard not replaceable, but the battery is so securely glued into position, it's almost not meant to be removed or ever replaced. With all the screws being the same size, reinstallation is quite easy. However, these screws are very tiny and easy to strip, so be careful when removing them. After a solid 10 minutes of unscrewing, I can finally detach the power button and unroute its cable and fully remove the keyboard. I will clean the keyboard area before I reinstall our new keyboard into place. After reinstalling the power button and the portion of the hinge which I needed to remove to deroute the cable, I can painstakingly reinstall all of the screws. As I've done with many of my other MacBooks, I'll be installing a colored sheet of cellophane to create a custom backlit keyboard. I have done a multicolored one before, as well as another purple one. As purple is my favorite color, I will be doing it again with this laptop. I can simply tape it into position behind the keyboard so the backlight can shine through it. With the backlight aligned, I can simply press the tabs back into place, adhering it back onto the frame. I can then go ahead and reinstall the bracket and the speaker back into position. While some people replace a DVD drive with a secondary hard drive or SSD, I will be leaving the factory DVD drive in place. Before I install the Wi-Fi card, I'm actually going to be upgrading it with one that has Bluetooth 4 enabled. I had this one laying around as I got it in a previous parts lot video, and it is actually out of a 2012 MacBook Pro. As the actual carriages themselves are incompatible, I'll need to remove the actual Wi-Fi module itself from each carriage and swap them across. After doing this, you can use a third-party tool to enable AirDrop to iOS devices. Although not natively supported, Bluetooth 4.0 will allow you to enable it. After pulling both units apart, I can swap our new module into our old carriage, screwing it back into position, reconnecting the cable, and carefully reinstalling the shielding that goes around it. It's ready to go. Reinstalling it into the machine, I can screw it into place, routing and connecting all the appropriate cables. Next to go in is our expansion card slot, which simply screws into position. Further, I can reinstall the speaker and microphone onto the logic board. After connecting that up, it's time to reinstall our logic board into our casing. I can remove the one fan from the left side so I can properly reconnect the backlight cable for the keyboard. I can then reinstall all the flex cables going to various components throughout the laptop. The hardest of which was our new keyboard, as the cable hadn't been bent into the correct position. After reinstalling our fan and our display cable, I could reconnect the battery and test out the laptop. Pressing the power button, nothing happened. Pressing it again, it booted right up. Testing out our keyboard, our shift key still doesn't work. So it appears it isn't the keyboard at fault. So it looks like I'll be using the right shift key. With our computer up and running, it's time to reinstall all the screws securing in place the logic board, as well as the various covers going over the flex cables. After that, it's time to get this disgusting 4 gigs of RAM out so we can throw in a nice new iFixit kit of 16 gigs of DDR3 memory straight into this MacBook Pro. After that, it's time to get rid of this slow hard drive and install our new crucial SSD, which we also got from iFixit. Screwing that into position, I can reconnect our battery and reinstall the bottom cover onto this MacBook Pro. After reinstalling the 10 Phillips head screws, all that's left to do is to give this MacBook a much needed clean. Using some alcohol and a microfiber cloth, I was able to remove almost all the marks from the top lid. However, there are some permanent scratches to the aluminium. After cleaning the base of the laptop, all that's left to do is to wipe down our matte anti-glare display, and we're done. So this is it, a working and patched 43cm 2011 MacBook Pro, packing 16 gigs of RAM, a 2.2 GHz Intel Core i7 and Intel HD Graphics 3000. We've successfully disabled the faulty AMD graphics for good, and hacked working brightness for macOS High Sierra. While the keyboard can control the brightness for High Sierra, the option is still missing from the OS. However, in all previous versions of macOS, the brightness will work with or without the 2 wires we added. This modification isn't without its quirks. You can no longer use AirPlay or attach a second monitor. Also, if the battery is disconnected and then reconnected, the Mac won't power on the first time. I believe this is because the GPU killer is reprogramming the ROM. While there are temporary methods to disable or repair the AMD graphics, this is a permanent solution, so resetting the PRAM or OS won't re-enable the GPU. I've seen people even put their logic boards in ovens. Although I love this mod, it's very complex to install. While skilled solderers could install the mod chip and run Sierra and lower, I wouldn't even attempt the additional 2 wires for the high Sierra support without a microscope. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffreys video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the computer playlist for more videos just like this one. And if you're looking for some tips or what tools I use to repair devices, be sure to check out my website, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.